Hey, this is the intersection where faith, life, and culture meet. I'm Pastor Eric Targe, and I'm here with Pastor Justin, the Muscles May. I know you don't like it. I love it. I love it. Get over it.
Why?
Because it's good.
Here's the thing. If we're going to start...
I don't care about the thing. And we're here today with Caitlin, the bookworm Wisniewski.
Thank you, Eric.
Wow.
Thank you.
Also, potentially not flattering.
Bookworm, she loves that one.
Okay, well,
actually
we're going to
like that
start...
one.
Okay, don't help him right now.
I'm
Okay.
doing it. See, I love it. So you've been called so many things. Now the muscles mate. A while ago, a group of us, or actually two of us at least, said that we were going to call you Mugglies, right? Because your muscles. You said they're just for show. They're useless, and
Yes,
so
this
they're
is
just
true.
they're just your ugly muscles, not good for anything.
Yeah.
They're beautiful muscles, though.
Wow.
I'm sure to your
This
wife
is gonna
especially.
This is
getting
gonna
weird,
get
right?
increasingly awkward.
It's going to get increasingly awkward. But hey, let's hop in. I'm curious.
Let's do it.
What is the weirdest job that you guys have ever held?
Weirdest
Oh, you should have prepped
job.
me for that. I've had a lot of jobs.
You've had a lot of jobs. You've had some cool
man.
jobs.
Yeah.
What jobs have you guys had?
I feel
Or
like
a cool job. I don't
I
care.
don't know if I've had anything weird. Like I've done fast food in high
Okay,
school,
nice.
like babysitting, dog walking. I've had a really cool job. When I was in college, I worked on all my summer breaks at a little like family-owned toy store. In like my parents live in a really small town, and it was like a very nice, like kind of family-owned. It was called Grandma's Toy Box, and it was so fun.
Go to
Like
Grandma's Toy Box.
it was a great job, and I really enjoyed it. And like one of my favorite things was I would like get, someone would come in and be like, hey, I need to buy a present for like my 5-year-old nephew, and I'd be like, let me show you some recommendations. And so that was like a fun job,
Yeah.
but I don't think I've had anything weird.
Okay, you
I feel like
weird
Justin-
job.
I feel like
Justin's had weird jobs.
I feel like Justin's gonna have a weird
Like my
job.
weird job I had was as a Taekwondo instructor
A
for a little
constructor.
while. Not constructor, instructor. I taught children Taekwondo. Isn't that interesting? But what about you?
That's very interesting. Well, okay, so I've done a lot of different things. But I don't know if the job itself is weird, but the circumstances around it were weird. So here we go.
Okay.
I'm a high school student, and I get a phone call from my pastor.
Oh, no.
And he says, Justin, there is an old couple in our church.
Okay.
They need some help, and I thought you would be the guy to do it. I'm like, oh,
What
no.
is the help? What is
Well,
the help?
It was some light
psyched.
landscaping help
Oh,
in the
okay.
backyard. Light landscaping.
Light landscaping.
So what that meant was a dump truck filled with gravel dumped in the back of their yard.
Oh.
And I had the job of single-handedly taking this giant mound, and I'm talking like a 6-foot mound of gravel,
Yeah,
shoveling and distributing that across it because they were getting older, and in Western
yeah.
Colorado, it's a thing where like it's really hard to keep grass up. It's a desert climate. So I was doing that. It's like backbreaking labor for like 6 to 8 hours, and in the middle, as compensation, they made me a sandwich featuring that awesomely disgusting bologna loaf with the
Oh
olives in it.
no!
And-
Olive bologna milk.
Yeah,
Yuck.
yeah. To which I
Oh,
responded,
yeah.
you know,
No.
I'm not actually that hungry, and I just worked faster to get the job done.
Dang, dude, I love that you said your pastor asked you to do that.
Oh, yeah.
Because pastors always ask for people to do the weirdest things. It's just
yeah.
so it's funny because it made me think of a story. When I was a teenager, as you guys know, I got saved as a teenager. Like my pastor knew that I was into theater and all different stuff. And there was a woman in our church who was feeling really ill, and she was actually, shortly thereafter, she passed away. And he said, hey, would you just visit her in the hospital? I'm like, okay. He's like, but is there any chance you would visit her as Elvis?
No.
And so no joke.
No.
I did Elvis impersonations for a job very briefly for some people in hospice. So yeah, that's a
Okay.
weird. But I have a weirder job. Ready? It's not mine. It's not mine.
ready.
I thought this was cool. So Matt Sangbush is said to have one of the weirdest jobs in all of California, and I mean that's a thing anyway, right? So he says, doesn't look like the typical person strolling down Pier 39 on Tuesday afternoon. Rather, Matt Sangbush is constantly carrying a giant bag of quarters. So Matt Sangbush is the guy that runs half of all of those little penny presses. You know the penny presses where
Yeah.
you add like 3 quarters?
Have them all over like
Yeah, and then
all
you
of
get
this
like the
stuff.
souvenir penny.
Yeah,
or
the souvenir
whatever.
pennies.
Yeah.
That is his job. He's the one who
Really?
supplies the quarters to all the. So he runs half of those machines in California, and he's the one who supplies the quarters to the machines that change like $1 into quarters because there's a huge coin shortage.
Huh.
And so he says that it's a lot of work, it's a whole bunch of stuff, but he is known for like one of the things that they interviewed him for in this article I read. They interviewed him because he is the one who is supplying California with its quarters during the coin study. So he said, I don't think you could convince anyone to do this job if they didn't like it. I can't imagine liking that, just putting quarters in a machine. He says, no one is doing it for the money, which is funny because it's about money. He said, the main reason I do it is because I love it. He says, it's a sad thing. People don't understand where quarters come from. We don't have a magical source of quarters. Well, actually, it's me, but it's a lot of hard work. I bust my rear for free, but it's in my best interest. So he just goes and does the quarter thing for free in order to make it all work out.
I feel like this guy is super delusional, though. Because
what?
Yeah, I don't care for him at all. And here's why.
No.
Here's the thing.
Oh, no, you're ruining the story.
No, I don't like it. I don't like him, and I don't like the story, and I'll tell you why. All right, because he's making this whole thing. He's like, well, they don't come for free, and I'm doing it. I'm doing this thing. I think he's just sort of inflating his ego. Anybody could do that. Anybody could do that job. That's not really. I appreciate that he's doing something that he loves.
I guess.
Well, no, I would disagree with you. I would disagree, because he's doing a service.
Well, and if he enjoys it.
If he enjoys it.
He said he loves to do it.
But there's a coin shortage.
He
is taking the coins out of his machines, his quarters, and putting them into those machines, changing them for dollars so that people will be able to participate. It's in his own interest, but so that people can go to arcades and other things and find joy in those things. Because he doesn't own those machines that change dollars into quarters. You don't make money off of that. He's taking the quarters from there,
Yeah.
I think what he's doing is valuable.
I mean, insofar as he's creating the infrastructure to enable his commerce to proceed.
And allowing people to participate in places of
But
rest.
the language is like, and I'm a bit of a hero because I'm carrying a bag of quarters around. And
I don't know if I would read it like that.
Yeah, I'm not reading it like that.
I don't know.
Yeah. Nobody else can do this job.
I doubt
I'm
that
the
Matt
quarter guy.
Sangbush is ever listening to this, but if he is, Caitlin and I, we value you.
We are so sorry.
We value you,
No.
and Justin.
I value you in that you're made in the image of God and you have infinite value and worth and potential. But what you're doing is just, it's okay.
No, see, and I think that's the problem, because that's the mindset we often have about work, right? We see certain work things as less valuable, and as someone who loves the Reformation as much as you do,
sure.
Like one of the key things that we see that the Reformers say is that every work. Everything that we do has value. Everything can contribute as long as it's not sinful. It can have value, right?
Right. And I believe it is Martin Luther who talks about if you are a Christian, and I'm totally botching this.
That's okay.
But if you are a Christian and you're like a street sweeper, you should be the best street sweeper there's ever been because your work is valuable and you're doing it unto the Lord.
Yeah, George Herbert has a poem. It's called The Elixir. I can't remember the line exactly in it, but he talks about it. He's like, listen, if I'm sweeping a floor for the glory of God, then my sweeping becomes, he's like, it becomes worship. He renders it as worship. Check out the poem. I'll put it in the show notes, but it's a good poem, The Elixir.
Okay. Obviously, I was trying to tease something up here a little bit.
Oh, were you? Okay.
Maybe, possibly.
Okay, tease something.
But
are you going to say something nice about Matt Sangbush now?
No. I think he needs to do some soul searching. But I want to say so many things do come to mind. So many things do come to mind. But did you guys ever read Brother Lawrence? Like the little book?
Okay.
So it's the monk. If you haven't read it, it's this really short book, and it reads like stereo instructions. Okay. Where a lot of it's like, it's just like, and Brother Lawrence did the dishes, and then he took out the trash, and then he did, it's this extremely very simplistic thing, and I forget even what century he was. But exactly to that point, he describes how prayerfully he washes every dish to the glory of God, and it is him offering that up. And it's just you get done reading it, and you're just super fired up to do anything. It's like I always tell the high school kids, like, it does not matter what your job is. Right? If you're flipping burgers, man, flip some dope burgers. Right? That's like you just do it to the very, very, very best of your ability.
Yeah.
And if you're providing quarters to machines and creating a memento for people to remember their experience at the Grand Canyon or any of those places.
Sort of the exception that proves the rule, right? Like that's the thing where
Okay.
I'm just saying, it's fine. Agree to disagree.
Okay. Well, today I want us to tune into an interview that I got to do with Brian Chappell. So a lot of people know Brian Chappell because he wrote
about
the
preaching.
book.
You did.
Yeah.
He's like the
No, so I
expositor
didn't
of
talk to him
preaching.
about that book. So
Okay.
that's his kind of his famous book, Christ-Centered Preaching. Everyone in Bible college and seminary has to read it.
It was my
and-
preaching textbook.
Was that your
Yeah.
preaching textbook?
Yeah, it was.
That's awesome. And it's a great book. It's a great book. But I decided to interview him about a new book he recently wrote called Grace at Work, which is all about how we can understand God's heart for our work, whether we're working as street sweeps, as quarter penny press people. I don't know the correct title for Matt Sangbush. Sorry, Matt. Or if you're a pastor, a secretary, if you're any of those things, like the Lord uses all of those equally. And so I'm excited for this conversation with Brian Chappell. It was a lot of fun, and I'm hoping it'll bless all of us.
Cool.
Let's get to it. Well, today we have with us Dr. Brian Chappell. He is currently the leader of the administrative committee of the PCA, the Presbyterian Church of America. He's done 1,000 things before that. He was the senior pastor of Grace Presbyterian Church and was the president of Covenant Theological Seminary. Dr. Chappell, welcome to The Intersection. So glad to have you with us.
Thank you, Eric. And you handled that mouthful just fine. So we
Oh,
got
I did.
the hardest part of the interview is already done.
The hardest part of the interview is done. So when we were talking before, I feel like we have to just bring it up. Your real title is the stated clerk of the Presbyterian Church of America, and you said that that's a Scottish thing?
Sure. So that's, it goes back to our Scottish root. Presbyterians have Scottish heritage. So stated clerk means leader of the administrative committee. So that's what it means.
That's
So-
awesome. Okay, you find fun ways to say everything.
Right.
Well, Dr. Chappell, I'm so glad that we could talk today. Anyone who's been to seminary really in the last 3 decades has become familiar with Dr. Chappell because he has a famous book called Christ-Centered Preaching. This was a book I had to read in my undergrad when I did my undergrad in theology, and I also read it in seminary when I went to TED's Trinity. And it is a great book that has really helped me grow in my preaching, and I know has helped many pastors grow in theirs. But today, I wanted to talk to you about a new book you wrote. It came out this summer, right?
That's correct.
And it's called Grace at Work.
Hey, we have the same book. How about that? Yeah.
Isn't that awesome? Yeah. So it's about grace at work, and it's all about how Christians should think about their work. And so I thought, how about let's just start off with a very simple question. Should Christians use the phrase TGIF? Right? Is it okay for Christians to wear shirts that say, I hate Mondays? I guess maybe what I'm asking is, should Christians be anti-work?
Yes. Well, it's probably not the best idea. Is that diplomatic enough?
Okay, that's diplomatic. So you don't have to
if-
burn your shirt if you have an I Hate Monday shirt, but
Yes. I mean,
why should Christians not be anti-work?
Well, I think now Christians know they're supposed to be for worship, right? So that sounds holy, right?
Yeah, that
So
works.
If you say we're supposed to be honoring God in everything we do, and that's actually what the Apostle Paul said, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God.
Fair.
So if I'm working and bringing glory to God, then that's actually a form of worship. Now, even when we're worshiping on Sunday, how do I say there are good sermons and bad sermons? There's aspects of worship and they're not. So not everything is equally pleasant, but it's all worship if we intend that it should be. So my goal, and I was just at lunch with an attorney today, and we were talking about this book, and he said, some of the things that I do as an attorney is just drudgery. I just have to, in order to prepare for a case, I've got to go through thousands of pages of material and copy, sometimes hundreds of cases if it's a major case. And he said, sometimes it's just pure drudgery. And he said, I asked my wife, how can this be glorifying to God? And in some ways, you're asking the same question. How can we do things that seem hard, that don't seem like missionary or preacher work, and still call it glorifying to God? And for me, it's the recognition that God loves everything he has made, and he has given us a place in the world to honor him. I mean, before we ever worked a lick of anything, right? God gave to humanity its label. What did he say? He said he would, when he made Adam and Eve, that he would make people in his image. Now, if you make somebody in your image, they are reflecting you, right? You're not God, but you're reflecting him. So what are we reflecting God as? We're reflecting his character and his care. And sometimes, even in our own lives, God's character and care comes out the greatest in the dark places, in the hard things, in the difficult things. If we are expressing God's character and care in our work, then that's a form of worship. And we are to be reminded that all honest work is done on holy ground, because what we are doing in that place is we are representing, reflecting God. When he said, go forth and multiply to Adam and Eve, he wasn't just talking about having lots of kids, right? He's talking about, I want my glory to be represented in all the earth. And sometimes you do that in the hard things. You show my character and care when it's not always pleasant and easy. Yes. Sometimes when you're just fulfilling the role that I've given you in life for providing for your family, for providing for your community, for making the world work. And that work is a form of worship. So we try to give significance to it without making it seem like it's all supposed to be fun and easy.
Yeah. So, but why does it matter? Why is it important to see our work as mattering? What's the big deal if work is work and church is worship? Like, I've heard a lot of people just ask that question, can't a job just be a job? Like, why does it have to be so important? I feel like, especially, like my generation, I'm a millennial. Millennials are known for having switched jobs left and right. They're constantly doing something new. And our parents' generation is asking, like, why do you need to find purpose in there? Is there importance in finding purpose? Like, work is worship, fine, but what does that do to my soul? What does that do to my mind to actually see work as mattering?
I like the way you said, what does it do to my soul? Because if what you think you are doing is empty, unimportant, purposeless, that eats at your soul. I'm here doing nothing, Whereas the Apostle Paul reminds us that when Christ came, he redeemed us from an empty way of life.
Yeah.
So if I'm actually perceiving purpose in what I'm doing, I'm being saved from emptiness, from nothingness. I think the occasion I talk about in the book of, because I have a journalism background, I was asked at a conference one time to talk to young people about being a Christian in the journalistic professions. And, when you're talking about kind of news reporting, people kind of get it. I'm supposed to report on corruption and injustice and evil and correct the world. That makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
The young woman came up to me afterwards, and what she said was this. She said, I don't know, I kind of appreciated what you said, but in the reality, the kind of journalism I want to do in life is I want to write fashion magazines. And she said, I know that's just vacuous and vain, but I really like it. And so, I had to say to her, now listen, if what you think you are going to do with the rest of your life is vacuous and vain, please don't do it. But if what you're thinking of doing is bringing a concept of beauty and integrity to an industry that's often ruled by vanity and vulgarity, then by all means, write for fashion magazines, because you're taking God's purposes into that corner of his world and taking his priorities where they don't currently shine. So again, if you just think it's vacuous and vain and empty, your soul will empty out. I mean, that's going to eat you away inside. But if you think there's purpose in what I'm doing, and God gives us opportunity to know there is purpose in what we're doing by working in a way that honors him, then that begins to give you a sense of fulfillment and purpose and energy and zeal, and even in the hard stuff, joy.
Yeah, and I loved how you brought that out in your book, the fashion student who came up to you. But I'm curious, because one of the things you brought out there is like beauty. You're like, oh, you can bring out the beauty of God's design, how this all works together. But would you say that are there jobs or careers that just simply don't have beauty? Are there things that we just say, no, you don't glorify God in that?
I think the average Christian, when you say you're supposed to honor God at work, what does that mean? Well, you think, I shouldn't lie or cheat or steal, and I should share my faith at lunchtime if I can, and it kind of ends there.
Yeah.
Well, okay, please don't lie, cheat, or steal. I mean, let's at least start there. That's a good thing.
Well, that's good.
But I think Gerard Manley Hopkins, one of my favorite poets, and one of the things he said is to lift up hands in prayer gives God glory, but a man with a dung fork in his hand and a woman with a slop pail gives him glory too. God is so great that all things give him glory if you mean that they should.
Yeah.
If what I'm doing is expressing, now I'm reflecting God, his character and his care in what I do, then I can be in horrible circumstances with a difficult boss and crude colleagues and so forth, and nonetheless say, I'm actually bringing the glory of God into this place. And it's not just fruitless and it's not just terrible, that God's character and care are being demonstrated in this place. Not just because I don't lie or cheat or steal, because I do the job well, because I do the, Dorothy Sayers said, Jesus didn't build tables as a carpenter. Jesus didn't make tables with wobbly legs.
Yeah.
Why? Because he's not going to cheat people, because he's going to bring his best to the labor, because he's going to bring God's best to the task. So it's not just that we don't lie, cheat, or steal. It's seeing that in the way that we do our job, we are providing God's influence in that corner of the world. Can I tell another story just to
Please tell another story. Go for it.
I
love this.
Again, it was just in the book where I was talking about how years ago, went to a conference on the West Coast, and at one of the breaks, they took us on a tour of a cheese factory in the area. And so, we're kind of looking over the work floor, and I watched this man stand by a conveyor belt where thousands of bricks of cheese are going by him. And about every 10th brick of cheese, he straightens it a little bit so that it will fit rightly into the packaging. Now, I confess my sin to you. I thought to myself, man, am I glad I'm not doing that job. Stand back and just straight. But then I had to think this, what if he didn't straighten the cheese so it didn't fit in the packaging right, so that bacteria got in there, so that it made people sick, so the company loses its reputation because it's made people ill and maybe they can't provide for their families, but then people don't buy the cheese, so you don't have a job and the company can't provide for employer. There's all these effects. And what I recognize is that all Christians have the ability to perform the George Bailey test. And you have to remember a movie, and you're a millennial. You may not remember It's a Wonderful Life.
I know It's a Wonderful Life. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. So, in what is terrible theology, you may remember that Clarence the angel is going to earn his wings, by somehow doing good deeds among men.
Yeah.
And so he shows George Bailey what life would have been like if he had not worked in that obscure savings and loan in that little obscure town. And George Bailey begins to recognize the lives, the people, the effect upon him. We get to look at our lives by performing the George Bailey test. And I'm not just saying, is what I'm doing, launching ships or writing Constitution. Is this job providing for my children so that eternal souls are being preserved for heaven? Is this job teaching other people about the character and care of God, so those who are going to eternal hell begin to understand there's a God who operates different than they expect and provides for people like us to know a salvation in Christ Jesus, not by their work, but by his grace? What am I reflecting is what makes my work holy, even though there may be corruption and difficulty all around me. And it's that perception that's giving meaning to what we're doing.
Well, that brings me to the question of what you talked about. You had a quote just a moment ago of the dung fork. And if anyone doesn't know what dung is, well, come on. But it's a dung fork, right? They're cleaning up after animals. Or perhaps in your book, you actually talked about at one point how you had an awful job that you hated, being like the food police in a cafeteria, making sure that college students didn't steal. And I guess some might look at this and feel like it's almost like a silver linings mentality to how we do our work. So like years ago, when I was in seminary, I mentioned to you, I was part of a group that was really focused on this idea of vocation. And I was in a small group that met with Steve Garber, who wrote the book Visions of Vocation. And one of the students brought up how he felt that this type of thinking, that's like, oh, well, every job matters, everything you do, whether you're, a dung fork person or a food police in a cafeteria, all of this matters, and how it could actually work against upward mobility, especially for minorities, saying like, oh, just be happy in what you got. Don't be looking. Do you think that's so? If not, why not? I'm curious your thoughts on that.
I think the opposite, as you might guess.
Yes, I was hoping you might.
Listen, if what you think is doing is empty, vain, and fruitless, there is no upward mobility. That will sap your strength, even as it saps your joy. I mean, if it's fruitless, empty, purposeless, you have no upward mobility because you have no energy to do it. But what if you're saying, even in the dark places, God is with me? Even if the dark places are here, God has expectations for me. He is changing the world around me by how I do what I do. That is incentive, not only to do this day well, but to see what God has planned for tomorrow, to keep moving into his mission for the world and for my life. And when I have that perception that God is not somewhere over there and I'm just doing this meaningless, purposeless thing, but rather God is here present, using my abilities, even in hard places, to do amazing things, that makes me, if you will, keep applying my gifts, keep applying my heart, keep applying God's principles to the place I am. I know one of the hardest accounts that I think I told in that book of was of Eric Liddell, and we all know the movie, you know, Chariots of Fire, and, you know, didn't run on the Sabbath and still got an Olympic medal and world fame. And not many people know what happened then. Well, then he died in a Japanese prison camp in China where he'd gone to be a missionary, you know. And, well, you know, being the president of a seminary, you mentioned that, meet people from all over the world. And one of my graduate students one time was a man who had graduated from a seminary in China, excuse me, not China, in Asia. And the president of that seminary had been in the prison camp with Eric Liddell, and simply told this account that it had been so awful, so terrible, that he had actually gone out into the prison yard near the barbed wire one day to kill himself.
Wow.
And Eric Liddell, knowing what that man intended, followed him into the prison yard up to the gate and said, look at the birds of the air. As long as we believe that God is with us, we are as free as the birds. Now, it was horrible circumstances that killed Eric Liddell. But it also saved the man there in the prison yard, who actually fulfilled the dream of Eric Liddell to save thousands across Asia with the ministry of the gospel. The Lord used him in that awful place, as Eric Liddell expressed the character and the care of God. In that awful place, God was doing not just silver lining things, God was doing amazing things by fulfilling his purpose, even in that dark place.
Do you think we have examples in scripture of this, of jobs that mattered? So I know in the book you brought out how Paul was a tent maker, Peter was a fisherman, and Jesus was a carpenter. And I think those are such good examples. But I know that some might respond saying, you know, well, Paul made tents to fund his ministry. Peter was a fisherman until he became an apostle, and Jesus did carpentry until his ministry began. Are there other people that we might look to, or maybe even those three? Like, I know it could be wrong. I think you would probably say it would be wrong to say that their jobs were just a means to a ministry ends. But can you tell us a little bit about that?
So I haven't thought of your question in depth. So who comes to mind? Lydia comes to mind, right? So you have a seller of purple, and you think of Peter's mother, you know, Tabitha. What benefit did she? Well, she gave us an apostle, and you know, what's glorifying in that? He's an apostle. And I talk about my wife as a professional musician.
Yeah.
And, you know, she talks about the time sometimes to young moms who are struggling with the routine of baby care and the weariness of it. And my wife, who's, you know, just amazingly skilled and able to play classical music, you know, at one point was cleaning a particularly yucky diaper from one of our kids. And she looked at one of her friends who was standing nearby, and she said, "These hands have played Mozart." And the wise friend said, "Maybe they're diapering the next Mozart." You know, I mean, who gets more credit, Billy Graham or the mother who raised him? All jobs done for the glory of God fulfill purposes that are eternal. That's why we say again, all honest work is done on holy ground. Now, if you don't have that perspective, if the work that I'm doing is not holy, not good, secondary, terrible, just got to get a paycheck, you know, just whatever, I confess that's what will take the spirit out of you and make life much more miserable than God ever intended. For those who know the joy of the Lord that is their strength, they have discerned purpose beyond difficulty.
Yeah.
You know, Eric, you and I, you're in a country where, you know, kind of Christians, we say, you know, do something that fulfills your gifts. Wonderful, great, wonderful. If you can do that. But the majority of the world lives daily by doing work that is dreary, repetitive, and mind-numbing.
Oh,
And
exactly.
we don't say where the church is prospering in China or Afghanistan or Iran, well, that's just useless. No, we say God is providing for his people and for eternity if we would perceive that that's what's happening. It's the old story, you know, Luther talking to the bricklayers, right? You know the story.
Oh, yeah.
Says to one, what are you doing? I'm laying bricks. Says the other, what are you doing? He says, I'm building a cathedral.
Yeah.
Now, they're both doing the same thing, but one has God's perspective and the other is only looking at work as drudgery. There is another way of seeing the world that gives us the hope, the fulfillment, the joy, the strength that God intends.
Would you have any advice or a word on how someone can worship through their work if they know that that what they're involved in is maybe not the end product isn't good, but their conditions are so poor? So again, we're you know, there's people all over the world that are suffering, and there's people in America who have jobs with bosses who abuse, overwork, cut hours, deny appropriate privileges. Is there, or maybe I mean, I know there are people that, you know, they're working as a janitor in a building where all the people there are doing is helping people who are very, very wealthy to become even more wealthy, probably in maybe not the best ways sometimes. I know there's good people doing that work as well.
Yeah,
But
I've been a janitor. What are you talking about? I've been a janitor.
no, I know, but I'm saying, but what would you say to the janitor who's like, well, yeah, if I was cleaning a school, then I'd feel good about what I'm doing. But I'm cleaning a business that I don't even like what they're doing.
Yeah. Well, you know, we've got such a brief time here to talk. So, you know, some of the honest things are, how is God honored? He's honored by how you work. He's honored by the product of your work. And you've just said, what if the product is not something that glorifies God? Well, then don't keep doing it. You know, find another path.
Yeah.
If that's what you really believe. What if you just got to do it to provide your family? Well, then you say, well, then I need for this time to provide for my family. You know, it's the old seminary story, you know, of the guy who says, you know, I'm here starving my family so that I can prepare to be a minister. And we have to say, now, wait a second. I mean, God may or may not have called you to be a minister. I mean, that God knows, but we don't know. But what I do know, if you've got kids, God called you to be a responsible father. There's no question about that.
Yes.
So, you know, you are called to be responsible for the character and care that you exhibit for the sake of the glory and the good of God. So if you're a father, you have to be responsible. Oh, well, I'm going to be a minister. Okay, then let God take you to the path that lets that occur rather than dishonor him in the job he has surely called you to do. And it's that difference, Eric, you already know this because you used the words, between vocation and occupation, right?
Yeah.
So occupation is what occupies us, but vocation comes from a word that actually means calling, right? Vocare, right? So it's our calling. And our goal in the Christian life is to see that our occupation is our vocation, right?
Yeah.
That we have not separated occupation from vocation.
Yeah.
Now, we may have to work to get there. We may have to find out by working rather than sitting back doing nothing, be like, you know, Paul talked in First Thessalonians about what to do with people who won't work, right? They don't eat. So he's expecting us to find God's will by being responsible. But in being responsible, we are saying, God, you show me, you guide me, you take me, use me. And all Christians always have that responsibility. Given who I am, what God has given me to be and do, and the opportunities before me, how can I best glorify God? And no matter who we are called to ask those questions and then let God take us where he intends.
Dr. Chappell, can I ask one last question? So this podcast is all about faith, life, and culture. And in culture right now, one of the big things we're talking about is this phrase that I'm sure you've heard multiple times now, quiet quitting, right? Can you tell me your thoughts? Like what would the Bible say to those who are in their jobs, to Christians who are quiet quitting?
Now, I didn't know you were going to ask that, Eric. So let's just say I'm going to.
I'm sorry.
Right now, I'm going to brag. I'm going to brag on my youngest daughter. Okay.
Wonderful.
So through the pandemic, she has worked in a place in the medical profession where she is needed.
Yeah.
And as the pandemic has begun to clear, she would really love, I'm going to be careful here, but to be in a different place, right?
Yeah.
And
my wife was a nurse through the pandemic as well. I get it.
But what she has recognized and before the Lord acted upon is to say this: if I were to leave right now, it wouldn't just be hard on the company. All these relationships I have of people who are around me would be affected by my decision done only for my sake. So my wonderful daughter has continued in a job that is not her favorite thing, not for her sake, but for the sake of those around her. She has not done quiet quitting. She, in my mind, has lived courageously for the sake of others until the time she believes God calls her to a different place in a way that does not damage others. So I think that that's still our responsibility, always to say, with who God has given me, the gifts He given me, but the opportunities and responsibilities He's given me, how do I best honor Him in this place?
Amen. Well, Dr. Chappell, thank you again so much for joining us here at The Intersection. We encourage you to check out his new book, Grace at Work. You can purchase it at Crossway or wherever books are sold. Again, thank you, Dr. Chappell, and thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.